and welcome to Geopolitical Trends. Here is Einar is here connecting with me already. So let me put you up here, Einar. So we both of us can show up on this screen. Sharing the screen. Okay. All right, present here. Share screen. Okay. Einar Tangen tab. Okay. Share. Okay, where is Einar? Right here at the screen. There you are. Can you hear me, Einar?
Yes, I can, loud and clear. I hope you can hear me. Pleasure to be with you.
Hold on, let me see why the screen is. The audio should work.
Can you hear me?
Can you hear me?
Yes, I can. Can you hear me?
I can hear you.
You can't. Okay, that's odd. The microphone is on.
No, no sound.
No sound.
And I have everything on here on my end.
Do you have any mute button? It says everybody can hear and see me. So
no, wow, no sound here. So let me make sure here. Hey guys, if you can hear the sound, give a thumbs up on the chat box so to make sure.
I can hear you.
Why am I not able to hear you?
I don't know. It says that I can hear you.
All right, let me figure this out. Why? Yeah, sound is good. It's just I can hear and see both of you. Okay.
Okay, now you can hear me?
Hear through here. So.
Okay.
Let me see this one here. All right.
Test.
The sound is working, but I can't hear.
The sound is working, but you can't hear.
Okay, let me see here.
that sounds.
Right. Wow. Why the sound is not echo reduce? Mic testing. Okay, default speaker.
Test. 10,
yeah.
8, 7, 6, 5, 4, 3, 2, 1.
Yeah,
testing.
Still can hear. Damn.
Ah, it's very odd. I'll sign out and come back.
Yeah, everything's working from my end here. So. All right, guys, we're just going to have to wait till Einar will reconnect again because I am not able to hear him, but yeah, he's right here. I can see him, but I can't hear. You might want to reset as well. Okay, let me reset it, but let me reset my sound here again just to make sure. Test. Yeah. Okay. It is working here on my end. Yeah, I can see you, but I can't hear. Wow. Yeah.
At any time, be ready.
Yeah.
Can you hear me now? Testing. 10, 9, 8, 7, 6, 5, 4, 3, 2, 1.
Okay. Wow.
Oh, okay. Everything's good on my end. I can hear you clearly.
It's my side here, but
yes, I think so. Testing. 10, 9, 8, 7, 6, 5, 4, 3, 2, 1. Test. Okay. It says everybody can see me and hear me. I don't know what else to say.
To stream.
Testing, 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 test,
Audio.
test, test,
Test, test,
test,
test. So it's
test,
it's going
test.
well
I can
here.
hear you. No,
Speaker.
nothing on from my end. Test, test.
Test, test, test. Wow.
Good. I can hear you. Can you hear me? No.
Wow. We're kind of stuck, Einar. There's the image, but we can't hear each other.
Yeah. Well, I can hear you. I can hear you.
Yeah.
I can hear you. Yes. I can hear you. You can't hear me.
I'm gonna just ask the question. So we'll just go ahead with that and see how this will move forward.
Okay.
So, well, first of all, thank you so much for being here, Einar. I truly appreciate you carving out the time. I know how busy you are, and I'm sure our viewers are so excited to. I mean, the moment I mention you to them, they're like, "Okay, we're gonna be there to listen to what Einar has to say." So, well, I'm not gonna waste too much time here. I'm gonna get into it right away, and I wanted to start by asking the first, sort of not a question, but in a form of conversation. What do you make out of the NATO summit's final communique? I had a chance to read it, and there was in a section 6 and section 23, focused specifically on China. And I'm going to just share with our viewers one brief statement here from the communique. It says, and I quote, "Strategic competition, pervasive instability, and recurrent shocks define our broader security environment. Conflict, fragility, and instability in Africa and the Middle East directly affect our security and the security of our partners. The People's Republic of China's stated ambitions and coercive policies challenge our interests, security, and values. We remain open to constructive engagements with the PRC." What do you make out of this, Einar? Given that the summit here is focusing on China rather than dealing with the Ukraine issue.
Well, I mean, quite frankly, this is what China had feared all along, that NATO is, in fact, preparing to have a dual front proxy battle, not involving American troops directly, but using assets in the East, whether it's India, Japan, South Korea, Philippines. I don't think it really matters much to the U.S. who is used, but as long as American soldiers are not directly on the front. This is due to the failures of all the Middle Eastern conflicts, the failures in Africa, also in South America. So, China is, I think, justifiably concerned. The statement that you've given clearly indicates that the U.S. is on a very, very negative side. And I say the U.S. when I mention NATO, simply because NATO is, under the control. It's basically motivated by the U.S. You can see statements from Washington showing up directly in the talk points of other countries, especially the Five Eyes, UK and Australia, Canada, and New Zealand.
So I can hear.
Go ahead. Go ahead. Go ahead. Your turn. Your turn. You can ask. You can ask. Now I can't hear you. No. 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 Oh.
All right.
Oh, okay.
Here you are. Yeah, I can hear. But you are muted. Yeah, sorry guys, there's this technical issue. Uh, uh, I don't know why everything was working earlier, and just all of a sudden it went silent. So to stream. So we're trying to see if Einar can reconnect again. Yeah, here he is coming here.
Hi.
Here you
Can
are.
you hear me?
Yes,
Can
I
you
can.
hear me?
Yes,
Oh,
I can.
wonderful. Oh, right. We can have a conversation. Oh, lovely.
So
Yes.
thank you, Einar. Truly appreciate it. So
No.
yeah, just a quick question, Einar. Why is the NATO focusing on China? Why is China becoming now the next target for NATO?
Yes, absolutely. I mean, the U.S. is signaling that it wants to not have a direct war, as I was saying before, but to have a proxy war, to use others to fight what they see as a existential threat to the United States, especially this American exceptionalism doctrine. That post World War II, the U.S. said it must lead in order to prevent World War III. It doesn't trust anybody. It's based on, the Europeans are untrustworthy because they brought us into 2 world wars, and the rest of the world are, obviously they're not white. They don't speak English, except a few exceptions like Australia and New Zealand, and therefore they can't be trusted. But even with Canada, as we have seen by the leaks, there's a tremendous amount of spying by the U.S. on them, including Australia. So this idea of not trusting anybody, leading the world or coercing it into one unipolar, liberal, democratic, capitalist whole, that was the dream. That was what the UN was supposed to foster. It was what the World Bank and the IMF were going to make. As you'll note, every time they have a loan, they include on it ideological things, that you have to have an open market, that you have to change your governance. And this is all, based on the theory of the greater good that the United States has. And that's what American exceptional is. So China's success is the issue. We would not be having this conversation if China hadn't been successful. But its success is this existential threat, especially to the people in Washington, not to the people of the United States. They just want to go about their business like the people all around the world. But the people, the elites in Washington in particular, have this strong belief that unless they're on top, the world will be in chaos. My question is, the U.S. has been on top for quite some time, yet the world is in chaos, not only through political conflicts, through interference with other countries, but simply on a global stage, the inability of the United States to rally countries around the true existential threats, extinction ones, involving climate change, the current economic situation, water issues, energy issues. These are all things that have to be addressed, but are not being addressed, simply, in my opinion, as a diversion from the failures of successive American governments who can't deal with their own debt, $32 trillion and counting. Just through the first 6 months of this year, the U.S. has accumulated another $1.4 trillion, which will be added to the debt. I mean, it's frightening. I mean, if it wasn't the United States, people would say that this was a Ponzi scheme. The U.S. has not lived within its budget, yearly budget. That means the amount that comes in is exceeded by the amount that goes out every year since 2001. In addition to that, the U.S. has borrowed very heavily for wars and the pandemic, in essence, tripling their debt since 2009. So Right now, you have this situation where the U.S. is trying to shift the focus on international affairs and blame China. China's at default for everything bad that's happened in the United States. Why? Because they're not equipped to deal with the current domestic situation.
Well, it's because I feel, Einar, that we can compete with the Chinese. So what are we left with? Is to come up with some strategies to undermine and slow down the progress of, why not compete? Because in competition, something good will come out of it instead of embarking on these policies. And this leads me to get your perspective on the recent trip of the Secretary of Treasury, Janet Yellen. And before her was the Secretary of State, Tony Blinken. And before him was the CIA director. What do you make out of? Here is a statement like this emanating from Washington, bashing and sort of saying whatever they're saying about China. On the other hand, sending high-ranking officials and asking, with China, can we talk? What do you make out of this double standard?
Well, it's hypocrisy, and I think most people are aware of it. As I said, how many times can I slap you before you don't want to shake my hand? I can say, look, I just want to be, we're not going to be friends, but, we should get along. But by the way, I'm going to start kicking you in a few minutes. And I don't want you to react. If you react, that's hostile. All right. And if you're hostile, then I'm going to have to increase the pressure. So these are the tactics of a bully. A bully will come up to you and demand your lunch money. And then if you don't give it to them, they'll punch you. And they say, if you fight, I'll really hurt you. Okay. And these are the actions of the United States. I don't know how else you can put it. I'd like to say that, there's some grand strategy here. I mean, you hit it on the head. There was that incident with Tonya Harding, where she paid some people to basically break the legs of her friend, right? Her friend and competitor, because she didn't think she could compete. So the only answer was, I'll break her legs and, that'll be good for me. Well, unfortunately, the Tonya Harding strategy seems to be the strategy of the U.S. I mean, I was on with a senior statesman. He had been an assistant national security advisor in a previous administration. And we were talking about the situation. He admitted he doesn't know, right, what the strategy, the Biden strategy is for China, because it's never been enunciated. All it is we're going to contain China. We're going to, try to keep them down. I don't know what that means. Given China's meteoric rise, the idea that you can somehow leverage or batter China into submission, this is the old colonial thinking. We already have the gunboat diplomacy that was used in the past as the U.S. sails warships up and down the Taiwan Straits. I mean, literally, after every meeting that that the U.S. has had with China, they sail a ship up and down the Taiwan Straits, which they know is going to, set the Chinese off. But I think it's deliberate. A lot of what we're seeing here is public relations. The U.S. wants to portray itself as the good guy, all right? And they want to portray anybody who is not on board with American hegemony, American exceptionalism, as the bad guy. So, what they need is they want to say, oh, look, we went over there and we tried to shake their hand and they don't want to talk to us. And then, all of a sudden, they're having war games around Taiwan, or they're sending, planes. Well, it's like it's complete surprise. And this is, it's, I don't know, it's the kind of stuff that I would expect from 11-year-olds, not people, on a schoolyard playground. This kind of bullying and trying to get reactions and trying to win the favor of the crowd. But the crowd is not being fooled. I mean, look at the situation with Ukraine and Russia. I mean, for the vast majority of the world, the global south, and also the Central Asia, they look at this. They're not applauding Russia's actions, but they quite clearly see that this was a long-term provocation. It didn't happen just a year and a bit ago. It happened 9 years ago when the U.S. backed a political putsch to remove someone they didn't like because he was pro-Russia and they wanted their pro-European guy in there. So they just simply did it, and that started what has led to this situation. Donbass basically said, we're not part of you, we're more Russian. You took away our vote, all right? You canceled democracy in favor of a military solution, all right? And we're out. And that started this civil war that's been raging ever since. So, you look at America's actions around the world, all right? It's not only that the U.S. is running, in essence, a Ponzi scheme financially, but if you want to define what a rogue state is, the U.S. fits the bill. A rogue state is an entity that disregards, starts wars. Check. The U.S. has started wars all over the place. In fact, 81% of all conflicts since World War II have involved the United States. Right? How do you excuse Afghanistan? You want one guy, so you go and destroy a country. You go into Iraq because you think this guy's a bad guy, and you make up stories about weapons of mass destruction, which turn out to be utter fabrications. Right? Syria, Yemen, the list goes on and on. Anybody the U.S. doesn't like, if they can't overcome them economically and politically, they try to cancel them militarily. And it's led to a terrible situation. But this going forward with these strategies which rely on systems that don't work. I mean, look, if tariffs, all right, and exclusions and all this kind of economic pressure worked, why is Iran still there? Why is Venezuela still going? Why is Cuba, after all of these years and hundreds of attempts, and not denied, hundreds of attempts to kill Castro, right? To take out a foreign leader. Why? Because, he's not our guy, right? There are so many instances. So the U.S. actions, all right, in causing war, check, that's a rogue state. Then add to it destruction and disregard for international institutions. The U.S. does not recognize the ICC, the International Criminal Court, although it refers people to the International Criminal Court.
That's right there.
Well, yes, but it refuses to have the ICC judge its, whether or not it's involved in war crimes. Right? The same thing. It's the U.S. is the lone holdout, I think, except Israel, on the Women's and Children's Protection Act. Right? The U.S. is not a member of the UN Conventions on Laws of the Sea, which was created because the U.S. insisted that it needed to have more extraterritorial control. In essence, 200-mile exclusion zone. Why? Because the U.S. is in the middle of the ocean. But it didn't care about what kind of problems that this would create internationally and globally with other places in the world. Complete disregard. But here's the irony. The U.S. isn't a signatory to it. But, on the other hand, it insists that it has the right and duty to enforce a convention it's not a member to. Right? So then let's look at the WTO. China is always accused of being hostile to international bodies and standards. Well, the WTO doesn't work anymore. Why? Because the U.S., since the Obama administration, so this is not just Trump, blame it all on Trump. This is going back to Obama. He said, we are not going to allow the appointment of any appellate judges. Well, without the appointment of appellate judge, because countries have a right to appeal, and without an appeal, no judgment is final, the WTO does not work. You can have a preliminary finding but because there's no appellate system, it doesn't work. Now, why would the U.S. do that? It was winning 90% of the cases that it brought at the WTO. So you're winning 90%, but that's not good enough. You have to win 100%. That is the definition of a rogue state. Right? So everywhere you turn, the U.S. economically, politically, and militarily, is using its hegemony to force other countries. Look at what happened with these chip making machines in both Japan and the Netherlands. The U.S. went and openly coerced them into saying that they will not sell, which is against their economic interest. They will not sell these machines to China. Right. Now, were these the first-tier machines? No, they weren't even first-tier machines. They were already only selling second-tier machines. But the U.S. said, no, we don't want you selling that. You go to the example of Huawei. The British gave Huawei a clean bill of health through their intelligence things. They went through and they said, well, we're going to look at this very closely. They had a full review. The review results was there's no problem with Huawei. The U.S. had a meeting. There were several cabinet officials involved. They were pounding the table, telling the Brits, you're either for us or against us. All right?
Wow.
It's not about Huawei. It's whether you're on our side or their side.
Oh,
right? This is the mark of a bully. You're either with me or against me. And if you're against me, I'm going to hurt you. Right? This kind of thing. So you have a rogue state being supported by a Ponzi scheme, which is now centering its focus on China, which it sees as its major adversary. All right? But they don't want to do it directly. They want to have this kind of proxy war. And it's so bad because one miscalculation and we find ourselves, nuclear powers facing off against each other, the possibility of somebody firing by accident or design a nuclear missile, and then we are facing Armageddon. We don't have to worry about climate change. We will have literally killed ourselves.
All right. Well, this is why I believe I've argued this, Einar, for a long time. The idea of us, even in my days in Washington, D.C., I have a conversation with colleagues inside and so forth, and whether those from the Pentagon or whatever else. And I was like, hey, the idea of containing China isn't going to work. It's because the conditions where China is today are not the same as where the Soviet Union was. So that containment policy, you may as well just forget about it because it won't work. And second, it will highlight the failure of our strategy, that if we ever had a strategy towards China to begin with. Just this morning, I had to check on some info in Europe just to confirm a few things. And I have family lives in Europe. And I checked on Germany. Well, guess what Germany just did? They told the U.S., no, we're going to go with China, economically speaking. It's because Germany sees where the trend is going. It's almost becoming clear to them. Of course, that came after the visit of the Chinese representative to Germany, but the U.S. was pressuring Germany not to take the step forward, but they said, no, we will. With China.
No, I agree with you. I had a meeting with one of the preeminent German think tanks about 3 days ago, and we were discussing this very issue. It was actually last Sunday, so a little more. And I said, well, what's happening here? They said, well, they issued this report, but it wasn't approved by the entire German government. It didn't go through the process. It was a unilateral report that was given that tried to thread the needle, somehow make the U.S. happy at the same time as preserving Germany's ability to trade with China. But you can't have it both ways. And this colonial era idea that you dictate, that the Western powers will dictate the agenda and tell you what you can and can't discuss, and what areas that are all right, we can cooperate, and the rest, well, no, we don't need to cooperate with that. I mean, that's unilateralism. I mean, the arrogance. Can you imagine showing up to a business deal and says, yeah, we want to make a deal, but we're not going to discuss price because that's not something we're comfortable with. We'll just discuss terms, when you're going to deliver and do all these things. But other things, no, that's not up for discussion.
No.
All right. Unless they have absolute control or think they have absolute control, that would be a non-starter. People would just get up and walk away. So, at this juncture, Germany's in a very difficult situation, as you said. Preserving their economy is being decimated. So many companies are moving out simply because they cannot effectively compete at the current prices. They are, their energy cost, if they're using gas, natural gas, is 3 times that of their competitors in the United States. And I asked a few questions of these think tank personnel who represented a business interest, and I said, "Is the U.S. more of a competitor or more of a market?" And their answer was, it's both, but it's more of a competitor. I said, "What is China? Is it more of a market or is it more of a competitor?" They said, "No, it's a market." So you have this realization at a very basic level of what this geopolitical Sturm und Drang is about. This conflict, but countries that are caught in between, very, very difficult. They're trying to, as you said, maintain trade ties with a country that has 120 primary trade relations ships with countries around the world. There's only 200 countries, so that gives you an idea. While at the same time, basically responding to a bully, the U.S. They're afraid if we go too far, the U.S. is already putting pressure on us to spend more on arms, to send more money and arms to Ukraine. 2% of our budget should go that. Here are the Germans who are suffering. They're losing real income on a month-to-month basis because of inflation. And the government has said, the answer to this is we're going to spend more money on bombs. I mean, if you're out there, you're about to lose your house. I don't think, saying, well, it's okay because, my contribution has been part of a Sidewinder missile that could, blow up a school. I mean, that makes me feel good. Now all of a sudden it's okay that I'm going to lose my house and everything that I've worked for my entire life. And it's because, a few Russians will be dead because of my efforts. I don't think so. I think the long-term solution for this is the voters waking up and saying, we don't want these foreign adventures anymore. All right, the U.S., it's $32 trillion and counting. Large percentage of that has been based on these wars, based on supporting the Pentagon. Note that the Pentagon, the war machine, was exempted from any kind of ceiling as part of this, raising the debt ceiling. They just said, well, everyone's got to economize here, but not the war effort. In fact, the new budget is higher than ever, $888 billion, 90 billion of which will go to, the CIA for disinformation purposes and things like this. Don't you ever wonder what you get for $90 billion a year? I mean, the mind boggles. And then you hear see these papers, these disclosures, whistleblowers showing that they're using the cash to recruit journalists around the world to basically be their stooges, and that they have these extensive spy networks. So what is the big strategy with this? Exactly what you said earlier. Accuse others of doing exactly what you're doing, and then claim, we're the good guys. China's spying. We saw this balloon in the sky. We have 32, all right, U-2 spy planes that fly out of Area 51, and they circumvent the world on a daily basis, collecting information at about 70,000 feet in the air. And we say, oh, China used a balloon that we can see and track, and this is sophisticated stuff, And the next level is already here. They have now unmanned vehicles that have this enhanced spying abilities and data collection that can stay up for much longer because they don't have a pilot. They don't have to worry about the comfort of it. They don't have to worry about the weight, the extra things that are necessary to support a pilot as they go about their business. They can send these things up. They can stay up for almost a day. They can circumvent the world, and as soon as they have dozens of them. We have 11,000 unmanned aerial vehicles, which collect data for us. Some are in the battlefield, but others are just circumventing the globe, spying on our neighbors, our allies. Why? Because we can't trust them. They're not American. They don't speak English. Why would we trust them? I mean, it really harkens back to an arrogance. And it's the kind of arrogance that, if you look through history, has destroyed empires. When empires believe it's unassailable and that they're driven by destiny and the grace of God to rule all, that's generally when they start to fail.
Unfortunately. So let me just remind our viewers who's just joining us, we are having a conversation with Einar Tangen. He's the chairman of the Asian Narrative and also a senior fellow at the Tahir Institute. So I'm going to, guys, by the way, once we're done with the conversation here, I'm going to provide you all the links and all that so you can check out Mr. Tangen. He is no stranger to the world of geopolitics and global economics and so forth. Let's turn our attention, Einar, if we may, to what just happened with the statement coming out of the Indian government. This is pertaining to India stating that it will not support the new currency of BRICS. And as you and I know, the emergence of a new currency that is backed by gold will be good for the global economy because it will be a counterweight to the US dollar, because we have abused the dollar by now in imposing sanctions on whomever we want. So what do you make out of India saying, no, there is no talks about this, when in reality it is? And also, why did India refuse to sign the SCO, the Shanghai Cooperation Organization's Development Strategy 2030?
Okay. Well, I mean, there's a couple of things. I do a lot of work on Indian television, and it's unusual. It's more tabloid TV. It's more for shock and awe. But you clearly see patterns there. All right. First off, in terms of a culture in India, if you have an advantage, use it. All right, and it's transactional. If we can get something from another party by holding things up, that's smart. That's what you should do. Unfortunately, that may apply to business, but it doesn't really apply to diplomacy. Diplomacy is a long-term game. Yes, there are national interests, but you have to start looking at it. And the reason I say this, if you look at India's track record on the recent G20, what did they do? They tried to use their position as being in charge of it to, in essence, settle domestic issues. They actually went to China and said, hey, listen, if you want to be part of the joint communique, you need to give us something on the border. This would be good for our government, right? But that's not what the G20 is about. You're supposed to put aside, to a certain extent, your domestic concerns and start thinking globally. The world is in crisis. It's not in crisis because of the border dispute between China and India. It's in crisis because of climate change and debt and you name it, the hostilities between global superpowers. So this is part of the DNA of how many Indians in government say, okay, we have an advantage, let's use it. In terms of the BRICS, there's some trepidation right now emerging from India. They do not want more members. There are now almost 19 or 20, depending on how you count, who have expressed interest in joining BRICS, which if they were to join, these are middle powers. The BRICS already economically outperforms the G7. If you add these other middle countries in, it dwarfs the G7. And you suddenly start to realize that there are, massive amounts of resources that are now under this umbrella, which is not controlled by the U.S. It's not controlled by Europe. And you even have defections. France saying, well, we might want to join. What would you think about that? I mean, a complete reversal. There used to be other countries said, well, we want to join. What are we going to have to do? Now it's European powers saying, well, we don't want to be left out. What do we have to do? So you have the situation where it's growing, but
Mhm.
India, against all rationality, is saying, well, no, we don't want to do that. And as far as this, the gold thing, they know it's a good idea. India has significant reserves of gold. I mean, on a personal basis, gold personal gold
Yeah.
within India is massive. Because gold jewelry and things like this, these are signs of prosperity. Women's dowries are defined by their gold jewelry, etc. So, it would seem natural for them to do that, but I think they're holding out for something. Now, I don't see it as a counterbalance to the US dollar quite yet. These are still early stages because you still need a secure way of transacting. You have billions of transactions which are going through the SWIFT system. And this is where the U.S. has been, abusing, using or abusing, depending on your point of view, their power. It was sworn up and down when SWIFT was created. Everyone saw the potential for misuse. The U.S. said categorically, we will never use SWIFT. We will never weaponize it. It is too important to the global financial system. It is off limits. We're putting it over in Europe. Don't worry about it. And then, you have to worry about it now because it has been weaponized. It's being used. This is another example of illiberal America. We always say that, why do we dislike other? Well, there's no due process, right? They don't have a legal system that, gives you a fair shake. Well, what have we done? We've seized assets of Russians, ordinary Russian people, in addition to, government funds and things like that, without a hearing. No hearing. We just say, he's Russian. We're taking his stuff.
We're taking over.
Right? I mean, and if you want to promote a world order of laws, the first thing you need to do is lead by example and obey the laws themselves. And the U.S. isn't doing that. So when I get back to India, India sees the tableau as basically every country for themselves. Get what you can whenever you can. And SCO, that issue is entangled with their animosity towards China and, to a larger degree, their animosity towards Pakistan. And that's a different set of geopolitical calculations between them. India, like the US, like everybody else, they insist that we're in the right, we're wonderful, peaceful people. It's just these dirty terrorists from Pakistan and these horrible people from China. Things. I mean, I've been on shows where the host has said, look, China is envious because the Indian man is far superior to the Chinese man. The Chinese man can't think for himself. The Indian man has the ability to, make up his own mind, to voice whatever he wants to voice, or she wants to voice. And you're kind of awestruck by the enormity of such sayings and things like this. But I mean, this is the kind of cannon fodder that they feed the masses on a daily basis. This isn't just one station. Many of the stations, the hosts themselves, not some right-wing troglodyte, peddling national superiority, but the hosts themselves say these types of things.
Wow.
And they say, well, it's just ratings. We just, we're in the business. This is about money, and that's about eyes on things, and we have to have controversy. But those are the kinds of things that are happening. I mean, India doesn't like to talk about the fact that it started ahead of China in the 1960s on a per GDP basis. And now is 5 times behind. I mean, the economy of China is 5 times that of India, and when you bring that up, they just say, well, no, that's not that we haven't agreed to discuss that. That's not the point. But then they make these kind of racist statements. And I'm not Chinese. I would object to this regardless of who somebody. It doesn't matter the nationality or a race of the person. I mean, this is very odd stuff to be saying on television. So from that, what I'm saying is you get a sense of how India thinks of the global stage. They realize that it has become multipolar. But instead of saying, well, if it's multipolar, we need to create a fabric in which we can all exist. And that's going to have to be set up a set of principles. China has theirs. They say civilization initiative, the development initiative, and the security initiative. They say these are things that we should be able to agree on. That countries should feel secure. Don't create your own security at the cost of the insecurity of another country. All right, and development is good. I don't know how that you can do it, and that respect for others is ultimately necessary in a multipolar world, because if you don't understand somebody and their point of view, right, you cannot have meaningful conversation. And that means knowing more about these countries, understanding what their needs are, trying to find consensus. This is not a corporate model anymore. The US introduced this idea that it's, if you have 51%, you do what you want. It doesn't matter about the minority. That's just tough luck. But I think the emerging multipolar world needs really to have a consensus model, or they do it. Now, India realizes the consensus model, but they're kind of going against it. They're saying, well, you have to come to us. You have to offer us something if you want us to cooperate. And I would say that that's probably not the best strategy. It may seem, it's what I call a little clever, all right? They are just trying to play the edges, but they're missing the bigger picture sometimes.
Yeah, and they don't realize that it will backfire one way or another, because that's
the
nature of the
absolutely.
Here's the thing, Einar. You know what? Because I did 2 videos on this, and I get my share of those comments from individuals that well, you need to take a step back and think about what you're saying, because what you're saying doesn't make any sense. All we are doing here is providing facts. The economy of China cannot be compared to that of India and vice versa. So when you in India calling India as a superpower, no, you can't do that, because it's not a fact. And they get so upset and hyped out. And here's the thing, Einar, that attracted my attention about these issues or statements from the external Minister of Foreign Affairs, John Sakar, was that all this happened right after the Prime Minister Modi returned from Washington, because 3 things happened. This issue with the currency, the second one with the SCO, and the third one was the agreement of India and the United States to allow for the presence or the establishment of a naval hub, if you will, a U.S. naval hub in India. What will a naval hub be doing in India if it is not for one purpose and one purpose only, which is to encircle China? And that's what's surprising.
Yeah, but I mean, it's kind of odd. The U.S. has already encircled China, not with 1 ring, but they have 2 rings. So I never quite understood why we put so much time and energy. The truth is, when you say you're going to have a port of call for nuclear submarines, what does that actually mean? They cannot get repaired there. Nuclear submarines spend 2/3 of their life at sea and 1/3 in a dry dock, basically being repaired and maintained. It's a very expensive. They have 2 separate crews, all right, and then they have to dry dock. Those dry docks, we're never going to allow those to be somewhere else, because we don't trust anybody. So they have to do that in the United States. So when you say that we're going to have a port of call there, it's really just meaningless. All it means is that, okay, there's a nuclear sub there. The value of a nuclear sub is not knowing where it is. The value of a nuclear sub is not knowing where it is, e.g. second strike capability. Then in the event of a nuclear war, a trigger, that mutual assured destruction would occur, because these nuclear submarines would unleash their rage on whatever country they think started the nuclear war, and at that point the world is ended. We have enough nuclear bombs in the world to destroy the world, for a couple of 100 times over. Well, I always say you only need to destroy it once. And that's enough. This kind of overkill capacity, which the Pentagon and other countries talk, well, we can destroy the world 50 times over. Okay, all right. I don't know what you're going to do. It's like, I'm going to kill you, and then once you're dead, I'm going to kill you 50 more times. You're really, really going to be sorry. You might not know it, but just think about it. I'm going to kill you 50 times. It's kind of juvenile, but it's scary.
Yeah.
Obviously, as I was talking about, things are transactional. Jay Shankar, he was here in China one time. He's a very smooth diplomat. But if he has a strategy, a true strategy for China, for India, and I don't mean vis-a-vis China, I mean the world, I would love to know about it, because I've studied him, I met him. I cannot discern any coherent strategy other than this kind of transactionalism that defines what they do. So when Modi goes to Washington, Washington offers some things, and they say, well, in return, you do X, Y, and Z. And he's like, oh, sure, because I want the things. I want the F-16s, and I want this missile system and that type of thing. But that's the irony. Right now, the U.S., the biggest export of the U.S. is becoming arms. And how is this going to solve anything? When's the last time having a bomb created anything? We've had military superiority over the entire world, but has it made it more peaceful? Did we win in Afghanistan, in Iraq? No. No. That's why we're going towards proxy wars. We're now willing to fight to the last Ukrainian, or if necessary, the last Taiwanese. We're even willing to sacrifice Japan if it's for a good cause. And this should frighten people. It really did on a very visceral basis. This idea that I'm not going to send my troops into harm's way. I'm going to send your children. Things. This whole thing with the cluster bombs. Over 100 countries have said that they don't want cluster bombs because it has been proven the use of cluster bombs, including by the U.S., has led to the greatest death toll among civilians, especially children. And yet the U.S. says, oh, don't worry about it. A few cluster bombs here and there never hurt anybody. Well, here's the irony. Those cluster bombs are going to be used within Ukraine. Yeah. So in the future, it's going to be Ukrainian children who are going to pay the price of this, horrible decision. Yes, we've run out of munitions to send to Ukraine. Well, I would take that as a time to take pause and decide, how long can we send munitions? Maybe peace. Maybe figuring out how we can get to the point where we're not sending munitions. Instead, people are trying to rebuild their country. No, they don't want to do that. Washington has said point blank, we will not do that. This is not the time. We've not had the military victory. How do you have military victory against a nuclear power like Russia, which dwarfs Ukraine's military? And, the one thing everybody knows about Russians from World War II and the Napoleonic Wars is they're stubborn. They would rather burn their houses and their fields than allow anybody else to have them, especially if they're invading their country. Rightly or wrongly, they feel very strongly about Ukraine. I always point to people when I said, well, tell me, Russian mafia, where does the Russian mafia come from? They say Odessa. Is Odessa in Russia? And they say, sure it is. I said, no, it isn't. It's on the far southern side of Ukraine. It's a port city as far away from Russia as you're going to get. All right. So, when you identify the Russian mafia in all these movies, all right, and in New York, what do they call it? Little Odessa. That's the place where the mafia hangs out. That's the Russian mafia things. Well, no, it's not by accident and things like that. And yes, no, the Ukrainians feel a very difference from Russia. A lot of it's stoked by what happened during the Cold War period and the Soviet Pact era. They felt that they were under Russia's control. They've had a reaction to it, but that doesn't mean you are going to start sacrificing your children and your husbands and wives to a bloody war that will not solve anything. And you go onto this next step. Why is it difficult to have peace in Ukraine? Well, you had Hollande, who was in charge of France at the time, and Merkel, who was in charge of Germany at the time, negotiate two peace treaties, Minsk I and Minsk II. Now, 8 years later, both of them announced that we never had any intention of negotiating in good faith. Those were just delay options while we figured out what our military alternatives could be. So how can you have good faith negotiations with countries who say, well, we're not going to accept anything except, a victory in our terms? So I think a lot of, if you start looking at Turkey, China, Brazil, these are countries, middle powers, who are not connected, or connected to both sides, but not connected to this conflict, saying it's time to have peer pressure, to sit down and have guarantors beyond those who have, visceral interests in this. We have to approach this from a global peace point of view. And the U.S. is having none of that. No. That's heresy. That's against American exceptionalism. That's against everything we stand for. So this is the real difficulty that's out there.
Let alone we couldn't be trusted anymore because we lost credibility. As a matter of fact, I had a conversation yesterday with some individuals from Washington, and there is already a conversation inside Congress that they're going to be asking now for the almost pass some sort of a bill or legislation of sort to allow the transfer of weapons from Taiwan to go to Ukraine. That's how far they're willing to go, and issuing some $3 billion as part of the defense spending bill. I say that's crazy. What are you doing all this for? Why are you fomenting more tensions? I mean, it's ridiculous. We never wanted to allow peace. I know that China proposed the 12 peace plan. I had a chance to read it. It was fair. But right there in Washington, for the first time that was initiated, we shut the door on that. We said, no, it ain't going to work. Even though it was logic, I read it. To me, it made perfect sense. And we didn't allow it.
Yeah, what I also read it, and what impressed me about it is there were no imposition of terms, and there was nothing in it for China. I mean, China says, okay, now we need trade, and we want a piece of the rebuilding process, and we'll support this peace process. They just set out 12 terms that, if accepted by all sides, including the cessation of tariffs and sanction, said, let's use that as a start to begin talks and build trust. And that's basically what that document said. It says, if we're going to have peace here, there are certain preconditions that we need to understand prior to sitting down at the table. So China was merely trying to set the table. But as you pointed out, the Pentagon and the elites in Washington just say, no, that runs contrary to everything that we believe. We must have military victory. Well, where have we had military victory lately? Grenada, yes, we beat the crap out of a small island manned by a few Cubans. That was really impressive. Other than that, we've lost every single entity. I mean, we're the most powerful military force in the world. Our expenditure is the equivalent of the next 9, and yet we can't win. And that's why we've switched to this proxy idea, and they're in love with it. At the CIA and at the Pentagon, they get to sell all sorts of weapons, as you just pointed out, because once they take those weapons away from Taiwan, guess what? They're going to replace them with better weapons for Taiwan, right? All right. Otherwise, if the U.S. really thought there was a threat to Taiwan and it's credible and imminent, why would they be taking away all of the ability of Taiwan or compromising the ability of Taiwan to protect itself if they were really fearing? I mean, wouldn't that just be a signal to China? Go ahead, take it. They're defenseless. We took all the ammunition and missiles, gave them to Ukraine. This is your golden opportunity. They have enough munitions for the next 5 minutes, and that's it. No, I mean, none of it makes sense from a rational point of view. It doesn't make sense from a strategic point of view. But what we have now is emotional politics. People are trying to find scapegoats for the things that we can't do. And in the U.S., I'm convinced. I was a politician myself. I've seen it in action. I used to run political campaigns. It's quite clear. It's looking for a scapegoat. If you can't solve it, it's somebody else's fault. You know, Joe Biden has been in Congress in the political process for 50 years. Well, over that 50 years, the U.S. went from 62% of the population being middle class to now 50%. Tell me about how that's victory. Tell me how, basically wages have stood still for this long period of time. There have been some increases, but in real terms today, Americans are losing, they've lost 4% of their real income since the beginning of the year due to inflation. So, where is the efforts to change that? Like you said, where's the Sputnik moment where we say, America, we can be better. We have the means to compete. We don't have to worry about shutting other people down. What we have to worry about is staying ahead of them. No, nothing from that angle. Just, we'll cripple them and we'll create confusion and wars around the world and sell lots of weapons. And is that a strategy? Is that making the world better? I mean, we still are an export country, and it's not now. It's increasingly more service exports. Those service exports are being threatened by the uncertainty, because those services are connected to manufacturing and to goods and how things move around the world. Yet we seem to be happily going about cutting our own throat and pretending that we're, doing something for the world and for everybody else. We're not.
That's what I read just yesterday. There's a report that's going to be coming out soon. I think didn't make it out to the public yet, but and the individual who wrote it, is kind of put it straightforward. We are on the verge of a recession by the end of the year, whether we want to admit it or not. And most Americans have no clue as to what's going, because they've been, some of us been fed the narrative from the government that the Biden administration is doing this good or that, when in reality it is not. So just before I forget, I want to mention one thing about those weapons from Taiwan that's going to be going. Those are the missiles from the 60s. That's how old they are, which will be useless in Ukraine anyway. So I want to get your take, Einar, on two visits by two non-official individuals, one of them from the US and one of them from Philippines. They just made a trip to China. What am I referring to here? I'm referring to the recent visit of the former president of Philippines, Duterte. And I'm referring to the former Secretary of State, Henry Kissinger. Both of them went to China. Why do you think civilians now, they are in the capacity of civilians, are going to China? And what is the objective?
Well, I think there's two different ones. You can't say they're doing both the same thing. Henry Kissinger, 100 years old, he was the person who said, don't go into Ukraine, because if you go into Ukraine, the Russians will fight you. I mean, that's not may fight you, they will. So did Bill Casey, who's head of the CIA. He said exactly the same things, and yet somehow we found ourselves there. With Kissinger, of course, the China portfolio is personal to him, because he and Nixon were the ones who were integral from the U.S. side in doing it. He sees the problems. He's spoken about them. He's counseled Biden and anybody who's willing to listen, even talk to Trump. And he's told them that this is something that, you're going about this the wrong way. You need to engage China in a different way. We have different systems, but don't think that containment is going to do it. Now, he was obviously a very, very he was a Cold War warrior, and he was not able to even he says we've gone a step too far. So he's there to try to provide some sanity. Obviously, he was invited by the Chinese government. He told the State Department before he was going to go. It was the meeting itself was mentioned during the meeting with Blinken that he had here in China. So it's not a surprise or anything. What's interesting, though, is the Biden administration's attitude towards it, where they're saying, well, gee whiz, it's just Henry. We listen to him, but, he doesn't represent us. Maybe he has some secret message that the Chinese want to send to us, that they're going to cave on some economic point or something like that. And I was, I was on with a former undersecretary of not secretary under. He was a national security advisor, assistant national security advisor, last night, and he couldn't, he said, I can't articulate what our strategy is vis-a-vis China, but I can tell you that if Henry comes back with something, it'll be welcomed by the White House. Well, this is a question you should ask yourself. Of all the meetings that have gone on, where Russia, the U.S. has gone to China and had these things, what has been offered? Zero.
Nothing.
They won't even take away the Trump's random designation of the gentleman, Defense Secretary Lee, as being on a blacklist. He was simply the purchasing manager during a long-standing Russia-China security. Basically, China buys engines, jet engines from Russia, and they have for quite some time. And then there was also the missile system, the 400, S-400 system, and he was he was the person in charge at the time of procuring those things. So he was put on the blacklist, and there was no reason for it, right? So at this juncture, they have decided that they don't want to withdraw that. That's why there was no meeting with him. It would, it just doesn't make sense. If China designated the defense secretary of the U.S. as a unwanted person, but of course the U.S. said, well, you have to take that off or there'll be no meetings. But this is the thing. This is a hypocrisy, accusing others of what you've done yourself and refusing to abide by any sense of rationality. And it can only be seen as provocations. So, but Duterte is a little bit different. Duterte, I think, is really trying to thread the needle. He's always been very concerned about the balance between U.S. and Chinese interests. He knows that the Philippines, bread is buttered economically with the Chinese, but the U.S. is a huge source of income from Filipino workers who send money back to the Philippines. Also, militarily, they're very much entwined. So they're trying to thread the needle, but it's American pressure. It's Americans aside who's saying, you're either with us or against us. And if you're against us, we're going to punish you. And you saw that quite clearly in places like Saudi Arabia. MBS made it very clear he was not going to cave into the pressure. He's not going to bankrupt his country so that the U.S. can enjoy, that Biden can get reelected by increasing the amount of oil they're putting out. You saw it in South Africa, where they just bluntly said, says, you, Mr. Blinken, you showed up here today and said you don't need to choose. We're not asking you to choose. But 2 days ago, Linda Grenfell, the ambassador to the UN, told me I had to choose. And we're no longer colonial possessions. All right. And you're hearing the echoes of this thing from Mexico down to other parts of South America. You're hearing it almost everywhere around the world. Now, the U.S., very powerful. They can, if they want to, we can exercise tremendous amounts of pressure on individual countries. What we're afraid of is that they're going to band together. And together they just say no. Yeah. And that really, really bothers Washington. And they see this as China's fault. China's succeeding in an illegal way because it's not our way. All right. It's dirty. It's something wrong. They're cheating. They create this image, but they can't explain it. China has prospered because of hard work and planning. They didn't have resources. They still don't. On a per person basis, they're near 100 out of 200 in resources per person. They didn't have any money. They were poor as church mice. And yet they went from the opening up period to today to being the second largest economy in the world. And that bothers us in the U.S. because we say that's not possible. So rather than trying to examine it and reflect on it and learn the lessons from what China has to offer, and maybe not copy the Chinese system, but look how we can compete against it, we're just trying to shut it down.
Yeah, or we can just learn from the how China raised the number of people from poverty to middle class, which is something now we have here in the U.S. The number of poor people is increasing. and yet the government is not doing anything about it. So, well, this is what I saw, for example, the recent trip by the New Zealand Prime Minister to China also signaled to me that New Zealand, even though member part of the Five Eyes too, that's going to be, is this a shift away from, or is it just based on New Zealand watching what's going on with Australia, given the tensions between Australia and China?
Well, I mean, New Zealand is a smaller country, and they've always had a complex relationship with Australia. I mean, I've met Australians who say they're not very they like Kiwis, the people, but the country they don't like, because they always have the sense that New Zealand is trying to take advantage of anything that Australia does, one way or the other. So if you went to Australia right now, I'm sure people would be saying, "Oh, those Kiwis, they're just trying to use the situation to their own advantage," this type of thing. From their point of view, though, they're simply doing what's necessary to survive. They have an economic relationship with China. They're not going to toss that away. They have different values, but we had the Treaty of Westphalia, where Protestants and Catholics got tired of killing each other. For 100 years, they've been slaughtering each other, men, women, and children, and they just got tired of it. They were bankrupt morally and financially. And they had peace. And the basis of peace is what happens in your country is your business. What happens in mine is mine. We can trade. And we will set our borders. And, that ushered in one of the longest periods of peace that we've had. And I think China is trying to do the same thing. They're just saying, look, whether you have different values doesn't mean that we don't have the same goals. And the goals are the betterment of our people. I mean, is there any country out there that says, I don't care about my people, we're just going to, it's all about me, other than Donald Trump. But I just, we're at this situation where we should be cognizant that we are very similar as people. We have the same concerns. And, the politics is getting in the way. This trying to shift blame and not take responsibility for the bad actions over a long period of time. Wow. Listen, I'm sorry, I only scheduled this for an hour, and I have another.
I know, Einar. I'm aware.
Can we do this again?
And I was about to say so. Yeah.
Okay.
I just want to let you guys know, Einar gives us this time because he is on schedule. So we are so grateful. Thank you so much, Einar. Truly appreciate
thank
it.
you.
And I look forward to having you again here. So.
Well, I look forward to it as well. I enjoy the discussion. Your perspective is wonderful, and it's good to have these discussions and really put things out in the open and let people decide. I don't want to tell people what they should think, and they have to think for themselves, and that's really important in this world, especially as we become more multilateral.
Yeah. Well, once again, thank you so much. So, and I'm gonna put the link for our viewers to get a hold of your. Posts in LinkedIn and so forth. So I'll take care of it.
Thank you. All right. Bye-bye.
Take care, Einar. All right, guys, here it is. So first of all, let me say thank you to, I will say thanks to Signer de la Tour. Hope I pronounce it correctly. Thank you so much for your super sticker. I just couldn't interrupt Einar while he was talking. And yes, he did mention to me that he will only have 1 hour because he had some other scheduled interviews and so forth. Once again, my apologies, guys, for the sound system at the beginning. Well, it's one of those things. This is why I always ask, is the sound working? Because it was working for me earlier. So, well, I hope you find you find the conversation with Einar. I will have him again on the show here. And I am now in the process of reaching out to an analyst from India, believe it or not. Yeah, somebody who is very objective, and I am gonna set the time, and I will keep you posted as to when I will do this. So be on the lookout for some videos I'm gonna be releasing this week, and I look forward to seeing you next time. As always, guys, remember, geopolitics impacts your daily life in more ways than one. Till next time, bye-bye.